Yeah. Okay, I'll do that.
Hi.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, I can see you.
That's Pam.
Hi, Pam. How are you? Good to see you again.
Hi, Jeff.
You wanted to-
You should come.
That's wait, Pam.
Right now, I'm Jeff. Sorry.
Good morning.
Well, you can hang your coats there if you want and
Okay.
help yourself to
Nice
see.
touch with the paper.
Yes. How about here? How about we split?
Hey, you can hang it there or okay, sure. There's some free
Yes, I'll put it there.
couple of serve, but.
So,
He used to order bed and breakfast and that's what he did. But that was like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, he has a piece of land about 5 acres. He's trying to subdivide it. Sell off. And he trusted me, so he said, "Hey, you take care of them." I said, "Okay." So that's how I. But I use it. Because number one, I love being in house. I like that. I enjoy.
Yeah, so do I.
Oh, that's all right.
But I like talking.
No, you like me. I love to talk. You can once you can read all like that stuff.
Yeah, that's your last one.
So just for this? First time? So you have newborn and stuff. They put it into a blue one, they have like kind of a red one.
Yeah, the other choice. Yeah, so we don't how might be good.
So what occupation to wear? Before we wear it.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Attention, please. If you could grab a drink quickly if you need one and find a seat. We're going to start pretty soon here, so we'll get going here.
Thanks to everybody for coming. We're going to get started here now. I know the weather conditions have been a bit questionable here the last week or so here in town, so I appreciate everybody making it here. For those that don't know me, my name is Jeff Wilson. I'm Irene's son, oldest son, probably favorite son. I'm not totally sure about that. And we're here to celebrate Irene Wilson's life. You'll see there's a card on every table that talks about Irene, a little memorabilia sort of thing. If you want to take one home with you, please do. And there's also a table outside that's got some pictures and notes and things reflective of Irene's life. So please take a moment to look at that. And if you haven't signed the guest list on your way in or the guest book, please do so on the way up. I wanted to say that Mark and I are quite touched by everybody that's shown up here today. We really appreciate it. There's been a good turnout of friends and family and neighbors and Irene's former co-workers and members of our family, and of course some families here that have been part of our lives as long as we've been alive and really since my mom and dad moved here. So thanks everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. And there's one additional group here that's invisible here today, and that's our friends and family in Dundee. So this camera here you'll see in front of me, we are streaming virtually or streaming online to Dundee, and people are watching us there late at night if they're still up. I wanted to reiterate that this is a celebration of life, even though I'm getting a little bit choked up here. We're here to celebrate and to rejoice and appreciate the life that my mom lived. This is not a funeral. And if you knew my mom at all, I think you know that it would be safe to say that she wouldn't want us to mourn her. She'd want us to raise a glass and laugh and smile and remember the good times. So that's what we're here to do today. And in celebrating her life and sharing stories, it's our hope that maybe you'll walk out of here knowing a little bit more about her when you leave than you did when you got here through some stories and memories that will be shared through the speakers. So as we get started, we're going to have a few speeches here from some family members. And then at the end of that, we'll show a photo montage that'll show a little history of Irene's life. And at the end of that, if anybody else would like to speak, you're welcome to come up and share a story or a memory if you like. And after that, or other than that, or aside from that, stick around, have a drink, talk, mingle, and maybe share some stories about my mom. So on that note, I'd like to bring up our first speaker, and that's Irene's sister. It's my Auntie Betty, Liz McKenna.
So I was talking to my family back home, and I wanted to start by saying, those of you that don't know, Irene was born in Dundee, which is the east coast of Scotland. She was one of 6 and the oldest daughter. Dundee is the oldest city in Scotland. It started in the 11th century, and it was built on an ancient volcano. You walk through the town and you go up these Wellgate steps, and then there's a great big brae. And we lived at the top of the hill. So we were the Hilltown people. We lived at a second floor tenement. There was a fishmonger's copper sign up above the closey and a bomb shelter across the street. There was bomb shelters in the backies as well. Irene came from a long line of Mays. So in Scotland, we tend to honor the lineage of the females in the family. So she was one of the Mays. And our mom was the backbone of our family. So she was sent to work when she was 12. She worked in the mills, the jute mills. So Dundee is famous for jam, jute, and journalism. And the jute mills were sort of Dickensian at that time. They gave you emphysema. They sometimes took your limbs. there was no such thing as air filters or earplugs. They made you deaf. And long before hemp was associated with marijuana. So the story of my mom is that when she was in the jute mill, she was on this great big machine, and there was a boy next to her on another great big machine. And they were children. Both their looms were down at the same time. And she told a story to me. I don't know if she told it to the others, but she told a story when she was young. I was in my 40s at that time. And she was actually talking about broken limbs. And she said, "Oh, I broke my limb." "Yeah." She said, "I was in the jute mill. Our limbs were down. We were getting our new spindles or bobbins put on. And I was playing hide and seek with the man, the boy, the child on the next loom." And she said, "I fell in a hole and I broke my arm." So my mom didn't write letters. She was kind of embarrassed about her writing. She was also smart. She was quick on the uptake, and she was a great storyteller and very funny. So she surrounded us with music, and she sang or whistled all day. Our lives were sort of touched by that. So Irene grew up in that. I grew up in that. Margaret grew up in that. Jackie grew up in that. Jimmy grew up in that. Then our lives were shattered when my father passed away and left all of us under school age. No EI, no welfare. So Irene sort of inherited and had to grow up kind of too early. But she inherited that stoic strength that my mom had. And she was also very funny. She loved a joke. She loved to tell stories that were funny. She saw the funny side of life, and that was what she got from my mom. I think we all have a funny bone, actually. But my mom relied on Irene a lot, and I suspect that Irene was her first and also her fairest. So my memories of growing up in Kirton as a family was playing cards on Sunday and listening to the radio and huddled round the fire in the living room. And coal and milk were delivered on a bike by the local school caretaker because I think he took pity on us. So he would bring a bag of coal balanced on the handlebars, and he would bring some milk, because in those days you used to get milk delivered to every school class. So we were one of the last families to get a television. But when we did get a television, we watched all the musicals. And my two sisters always performed. And they performed two things in particular. So they would get the soot from the chimney. They would blacken their teeth. They'd wear top hats. They'd wear rags. And they would sing two songs. So they would sing Sisters. So Sisters goes kind of like, sisters, sisters, there were never such devoted sisters. So it kind of went like that. And the second one they did was Fred Astaire and Judy Garland from an ancient movie now that some of you weren't even born then probably, but it was them, we're a couple of swells. So they would dress up and mimic these two. They were great jivers. So they would practice their jiving, and they would throw me over their shoulder and go between their legs, and I was the one that they practiced on. They used to use, there was bags of chips you got when you went to the baths. The baths were freezing because it was a River Tay, and it came from the North Sea. And when you came out of there, you got a shivery bite, and you would get this bag of chips. And inside the bag of chips was a little dark blue paper, little twisted bag. And in it was a pinch of salt. And they would take that paper and they would keep it. And then when we got to a Sunday, they would cover one of their teeth. So it was like a missing tooth. And they would sing and perform for us all. It was really quite touching when I look back, and quite the thing. Margaret, when I asked her, Margaret and Irene were close. And they were only 14 months apart. They got along pretty good most of the time, but Margaret tells me about a story where they were rolling about the floor, pulling one another's hair about a Pond's ruby red lipstick from Woolies. So they were young, they were sort of going to the dancing, and Irene always stole Margaret's stockings or her latest sweater when she was going out with Alfie. So there was kind of tension there, but most of the time they got along pretty good. Irene and Margaret and Alfie always wrote and kept a diary. And he would never miss a chance to tell us about the first date that they went on. It was at the Kinnaird, so that's up the Overgate, the Hawk Hill, I should say. And Alfie met this young woman, Irene, thought he was on a promise, went to the movies, and here she shows up with my little brother. And he's 4. So they apparently met and saw a cowboy movie. But I think Alfie never forgave Jimmy and never forgave Irene, probably, for dragging along her little smelly brother that was, by the end of the cowboy movie, was covered in chocolate. So the other story that I wanted to talk about was Irene and Alf got married, and they came to live with us in Curtin. Because when my dad died and we were all left, bereft, bedraggled, unkempt, we were called the Wild Batches, because we were kind of unruly, and my mom had to go to work, and Irene was left really as a second mom. When they got married, usually the custom is that you have a 3-tier wedding cake, and the top tier is kept for your first son. And you bring it out, and you actually do a christening. You carry the christening piece on the top of the baby, and it's given to the first person you meet of the opposite sex. So when they went to, Alfie was conscripted, so when he went to Germany, Irene went. They put all their treasures in the cupboard because they were given the prime room in our house, and we all just squished into the other 2 rooms. When they were away, of course, they came back 2 years later, and they put the top tier of the cake in the cupboard. And when they got back, all that was left of the top tier were crumbs, because Jimmy had been in at the cake. And as Margaret says, it was just as well because Jeffrey was a long time coming, right? So these are little reminiscences that I wanted to make, but I wanted to finish with a poem that I adapted from Stephen Mulrine. And I lost my last page, so I'm a bit ditzy, like Irene was ditzy sometimes. But this gives you a picture of what it was like to grow up, and those of us from Dundee know. When I was wee, it was bare feet, and like sweeties, and ninny your cheek, and giseleni, and shots on bikes, and kick the can, and stealing trikes was rare. When I was wee, it was stop, stop, ba, ba, is what you played. Giant steps, fairy steps, and hymn to your ma. And sass on a piece. Now, for those of you that don't know what sass is, it's HP sauce. So sometimes that was your sandwich you had for your tea. So sass on a piece and put that in your belly, kick door rinfest, and chicky melly, do you dare? When I was wee, it was tears and snotters and great big gubbers, and get you here, you dirty wee buggers. So I was there. So it's kind of a little memento to my sister, and I'm going to pass over the mic to my son, who's going to kind of say a few words from my family back home. She is our fondest and our dearest. She's going to be missed.
Thanks for that, Mom. I was good right up till the end. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh. For those of you, I mean, I recognize most of the faces in the room, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Naren, Irene's nephew and Liz's son. The last few weeks have been bittersweet. Mark and Callum were over at my mom's house a few days ago, and we were going through old pictures and albums and reminiscing and telling some stories about Irene and Alfie. We spent a lot of time with the Wilsons as kids and still do. And Irene's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. You heard from my mom just now, and although we laugh and see the humor in the insanity of it all, none of us that have grown up in Canada can really identify or even understand the hardships and the challenges of the generation that came before us growing up in Scotland right around the end of World War II. When you hear my Auntie Margaret tell her stories and look back on what it was all like, to be honest, even though she makes you laugh, and she makes you laugh a lot, and she jokes, it really is remarkable that any of them survived. When Granddad passed away, Granny leaned on Irene a lot. She had to, and Irene did what she's always done. She stepped up. Irene did the hard things that other people wouldn't and couldn't. She brought that toughness and stoicism with her to Canada. When I spoke with Jimmy the other day, we had a good laugh as well. He mentioned Irene and Alf's wedding cake. When I asked Jimmy about it, he said he just climbed up into the cupboard every night and ate a little tiny piece. He didn't think anybody would notice. My mom actually told me another funny story about Irene, Alf, and Jimmy driving to London. When I asked Jimmy about it, he provided a few crucial details that my mother left out. They drove Alf's Standard 8 from Dundee to London and back. Every time they got to a hill, Jimmy and Irene would have to get out and push so the car could make it up the hill. He said there was no way Alf was getting out and pushing. It was just too embarrassing. I asked Jimmy, what year would that have been? And he said 1959, 1960. And I said, well, it couldn't have been 1959 or 60, because in my head I had a mental image of a young teenager, a young man pushing a car up a hill. And I said, well, how old were you? And he says, well, I was 9 or 10. You know, the image of an 18-year-old pushing a car up a hill with his big sister is funny enough, but I mean, a 9-year-old pushing a car all the way to London, I mean, it's absolutely, it's ridiculous. And, but here's the kicker, and this is the part of the story that my mom didn't share. Granny was with them. Now, Granny didn't have to push, but she did get out of the car at every hill and walk up alongside just to lighten the load, apparently. And it's not that Alf wasn't chivalrous. He just knew that he'd be in a lot more danger if Irene was behind the wheel when they got to the top of the hill and had to go down. My impression of my aunt has always been that she was a quiet force of nature. My cousin Christopher shared an excerpt, and there's a book actually out in the back, the book that I'm talking about, but he shared an excerpt from a book where there's a chapter devoted to Irene. It's called The Vancouver Stock Exchange, the world's greatest venture capital market. And he shared that with me a few days ago when we spoke. And there's a chapter on Irene in the book, but it talks about all of her accomplishments in the mining sector. And the book says that early on, Irene was known for her ability to handle the enormous amount of work that was involved in joint ventures, keeping books, contracts and claim records, geological details, and being a general factorum as far as anything to do with mining, with a mining company. But as my mom said, she also had a refreshingly ditzy side. My mom told me a story about Irene flying into Toronto for a mining convention or something like that. And not one to spend lavishly on extravagances like a hotel room. She flew out in the morning, carry-on bag, was getting dressed to the nines in the bathroom at Pearson International, only to realize that she had one shoe. And I can picture Irene presenting to a room full of the who's who of the Canadian mining sector, millionaires and probably a few billionaires, up there with one shoe. But make no mistake, Irene was a pioneer. She didn't just break glass ceilings, she crashed through them. And while she was crashing through those ceilings, she was raising 2 young boys simultaneously. She was an amazing woman. I was going to acknowledge the family back home, but Jeff had done that for me. But a lot of these stories and stuff, I'm just passing on from conversations that I've had with everybody back home. Family and clan is an important concept for us Scots. It was particularly important for Irene and Alf. Alf's friendship with Marty Allen spanned over 70 years. They'd been friends since the Boys Brigade, which would have been like the Boy Scouts here in North America. And when they met Irene and Norma as young teenagers, the 4 of them would double date and were, from my understanding, pretty much inseparable. Marty and Norma were the first of our clan to immigrate. It was only natural that they would sponsor their best friends to join them in Canada. So in the early 60s, they were joined in the west end of downtown Vancouver by Alf and Irene, where they met Davy and Helen. They were followed by Bill, Sandra, Wilma, Dawn and Doreen, my mom and dad, Fraser and Brenda, and Jess and Willie. That was the beginning of our clan here in North America. Our clan has been tested over the last decade. Yeah, it's been tested. We lost Alf, then Marty during COVID. Then last year we lost Dad, Davey, and now Irene. Yeah. I'm sure most of you, I think there's one of these up at the front as well, but I'm sure most of you recognize this, right? It's a more than 50-year-old Christmas song sheet from Super Value on Davie Street in the West End. And as I look around the room, I recognize many faces and friendships that have been made at Irene and Alf's annual Christmas carol singing. It's a remarkable tradition that they both built that spans over 50 years. In typical Scottish fashion, they opened their house and their hearts to family and friends and even strangers. To Alf and Irene, the bonds that make family weren't just biological. They brought all of us together every year, across generations and over a lifetime, to celebrate a tradition that ties us all together. A formidable North American clan was formed on Ash Street. Irene was a remarkable woman. From such humble beginnings, she achieved a status in the business world that would have been almost impossible for most females of her generation, certainly. Yet she never forgot where she came from. She was humble, unassuming, fiercely unpretentious, and kind. But she also had grit and a dogged determination to get up, dress up, and show up. There's never going to be another one like Irene. So let's tip a glass for her today and celebrate her, okay?
It's all fine until the ending of these things, and then you get me. Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Betty. That was really great. So from the Wilson side of the family now, I'd like to have my cousin Stuart come up and say a few words about my mom. Stuart?
Thanks.
Jeff. A few notes. As I said, I'm Stuart Wilson, Irene's nephew. And yeah, Irene definitely had a beautiful soul, no doubt about it. I pick up the story from where Betty left off when they came here. We followed them out in '69, my mom and dad, Alf's brother, and had a good time when we came. I go way back with Irene. They're my godparents, Alf and Irene. There's a picture in this montage you'll see later on of Alf and Irene and me on their knee at 6 months old or so at the christening. And she's looking like a young Elizabeth Taylor. She was beautiful. I'd like to thank Mark and Jeff for asking me to do this because it gave me a chance to reflect on Irene and what a special place she had in my life all these years. As I say, we came here in '69. I was 7 years old. My brother was 8. And we moved in with them on Cardero Street in their little one-bedroom apartment. In those days, there was lots of apartments in the West End. They're all new and ready to rent to anybody. No housing shortage then. We got an apartment across the street the next month and lived there for the summer of '69, and it was like the French Riviera to me, coming from Dundee down to the West End, down to the beach every day. Irene would take us out shopping to Super Value, where we'd get the Christmas song sheets. But she'd take us to the candy department. And in Scotland in those days, in the '60s, there was no supermarket. You didn't walk around picking up things and putting them in a cart. You asked the guy to get you stuff from behind the counter. So this idea of a supermarket was amazing to us. I was like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. Irene's walking around the candy and she's trying them out. Try some of those out. Have one of these. It's amazing. Couldn't believe my good luck. But then Jeff, or Godfrey, I think your mother called you for a couple of weeks after you were born. She's kind of that ditzy side. Oh, Godfrey. Must have been for a while because it stuck with you for a long time. Anyway, that took Irene out of work for a while, but she went back pretty quick thereafter. And she'd have Neil and I, my brother, we'd go down and work for her occasionally when we were teenagers, 13, 14 years old. She'd have us come down to her office downtown and file things or take photocopies, and we're like human collators basically. But we paid well and get to drive down in her little orange VW Beetle. I don't know if y'all remember that car, but that was her trademark car. And then shortly after that was I got married. Susan and I were married, and one of the first things we did upon arranging the marriage was ask for Alf and Irene's assistance. Alf gave a nice speech, and Irene worked she was a hostess and did a great job. And she got to know my in-laws, Susan's parents, very well. They became quite close friends. They shared a love of music, obviously. And then shortly after that, she arranged Alf's 50th wedding party, which was on a cruise. We took a cruise up Indian Arm. There was 30 or 40 people there. That was a very memorable day. I know my in-laws were there and had a great time. And then shortly after that was Irene's 50th birthday, which we celebrated in grand fashion downtown. Started in her office building on a Friday night after work. I think it was a surprise. So got her after work and so started to party in her office, and then all went down to the Engineers Club down on Pender Street. Got the piano player up and playing. Took him back to the office afterwards. There was another bottle stashed there. Kept singing, walking down the street. There was a big group of us just walking and singing. Irene was a great one for singing. Remember famous night when Gavin's parents were here from Ireland. Irish people, they're kind of like Scottish people, just not as good. But But we had a fine night singing and drinking Irish whiskey and the whole bit out in White Rock there. That was a great night. Then there was a time Irene, actually, she phoned my mother-in-law, who was a Mexican-American, and Irene was wanting the Mexican national anthem. She was at the Mexican consulate and wanted to sing this song for all the Mexicans there. So she got Jeanette to help her out with that rendition. We were one of the lucky ones, Susan and I. We got to see her in the hospital shortly before she passed. And she was looking great, you know. She was alive, vibrant, and really sharp, talking about Trump and these sorts of things. I got her going, but it was, that was it. Anyway, that's all I got to say, and maybe we'll just, one more toast to Irene. Good night, Irene.
Thanks, Stuart. Great speech. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here today as we honor and celebrate an amazing life. One of my earliest memories is a family vacation we took to Mount Baker. My dad would usually take us skiing, while my mom would stay at the cabin. She would relax, read a book, and prepare our spaghetti dinner. I asked my mom if she knows how to ski, and she said, "Oh yeah, sure I can. Your father and I used to go a few times back in Scotland, but it's been a while." So the next morning as we're getting ready, I said, oh, sorry. Irene said, "I think I'll join you guys and go skiing with you." Well, she didn't have skis, boots, or poles, so she had to rent all the equipment. So after about an hour of waiting for Irene to get all her equipment, we were ready to go. With all of us standing at the top of the bunny hill, Irene slowly started sliding down the hill. She got about 10 feet and fell on her bum. Irene started laughing hysterically. And after a couple minutes, she got up, looked over at us, and just said, "If you need me, I'll be in the lodge reading my book." That was the first time and the last time I skied with my mom. Anyway, I just want to say cheers to everybody for coming here. Thank you. Miss you, Mom. Cheers.
That was short and sweet. Mine won't be. So, in thinking about what to say for something like this, for someone you've known your entire life, it's tough to sort of come up with the one perfect anecdote. But when I think about how my mom lived, and I think both Betty and Naren have talked a little bit about it, the one thing that stands out to me is just her work ethic and her tenacity and her ability to face challenges and overcome, and just the way that she lived her life in that regard. She wouldn't back down from anything or anyone or any challenge, and I don't think I ever heard her say that something was too hard or too difficult. She'd take on anything that you put in front of her. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I had an argument or a debate with her about something, and inevitably she would be right. And I think where that kind of comes from, I think Betty and Naren both touched on it a little bit in terms of the way that my mom grew up and sort of the reality of her childhood, where she had to sort of become an adult pretty quickly and maybe prematurely as a young girl. And to take on tough challenges and do what had to be done, not just for herself, but for the benefit of other people and other people around her. That was just kind of the way that she was built. Again, it's been touched on that, fast forward a few years, my mom gets a little bit older. She meets Alf Wilson. They get married. They get stationed. My dad gets stationed in Germany as part of his time in the British Army. Again, not an easy thing to do at that young age after getting married, to up and move to another country and have to learn another language. But, in Irene's typical fashion, she did. She went, she got a job, she learned to speak the language, and they had a pretty enjoyable couple of years there. So when they finished their time in Germany, they came back to Dundee, and it was pretty clear that they wanted to move abroad somewhere. And again, as has been stated, Norma and Marty, who had moved to Canada. In fact, Mark and I, when we were looking through old photographs for the montage, came across an old letter that you had sent from Vancouver to Dundee by mail, telling them about Vancouver and inviting them to come. So they did. They sold all their belongings and flew over to Canada and landed in the West End. And again, as Stuart sort of said, living in the West End for them, coming from Scotland, was a pretty fun place to be in the '60s. And they were, the stories that I've been allowed to hear about anyway. They were going to live music venues and jazz clubs and socializing and partying with professional athletes and sort of living the life in Vancouver. And it was definitely a far cry from Dundee. And it didn't take them long, I'm sure, to realize that they were here to stay. That is until 1970, when I showed up and sort of ruined the party a little bit. And they then moved to Richmond, and so began life in the suburbs. But before that, my mom, again, as has been touched on, she was working in the mining industry. And she ended up in the mining industry not because it was some passion that she had or some experience that she had. It was really at first just a job. She started out, I think, as essentially a secretary or what we would maybe now call an executive assistant, and really was just willing to sort of do whatever had to be done to succeed and to help the people that she worked with. Over time, I think she enjoyed the challenges, and she took on more and learned more, and eventually, by about the early 1990s, she began running some of her own companies. She worked long hours. Such long hours, in fact, that, as some people here in the room will know, it wasn't unusual for Mark and I, when we were in our 20s, to come home from a late night at the bar and go downstairs, and there was my mom sitting at her home computer working away at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And she wasn't particularly deterred by the fact that a couple of drunk 20-year-olds were in the room next door making a noise. She just kept working because, again, something had to get done. She sat there and she did it until it was finished. After she retired in 2002, I, at that time, was embarking on my own career in the mining industry. And I was reminded a few times of the impact that my mom had had on the industry and how prominent she was. And I can remember one time, sort of, again, trying to sort of establish myself in the business and meeting a fairly well-known stockbroker. And when I met with him, he asked me my name. And I said, Jeff Wilson. And he said, Wilson? Are you Irene Wilson's son? And I said, yeah, why? She said, man, you must be tough. He said, man, you must be tough. She was tough. Actually, she was pretty tough most of the time, but she was pretty easy on Mark and I think in her personal life, she let down her guard, and she was basically just, a loving person and a generous person. She loved her family. She valued her family, her husband, her sons, her brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews. And of course, she adored her grandchildren, Emily, Trevor, and Callum. In the last few years, her grandchildren were really the one thing that brought her the most joy. She'd light up when they walked in the room, and she always made them laugh with sort of silly antics and silly jokes, and I'm sure they'll have lots of memories as they get older about some of the funny stories that they have with Grandma, including the time that we were sitting around doing riddles, and the answer to one of the questions was Wi-Fi, and as Granny read the card, she said, "What's Wi-Fi?" And she was serious. She didn't know. But in spite of her, all this talk about her work and her work ethic, also I think something that should be touched on is her generosity. Was one of her strongest traits. My mom would give the shirt off her back to anyone in need. And in fact, she loved giving so much that she often went on shopping sprees and filled her closet with just stuff to give to people without really knowing who she was going to eventually give it to. But if you came for a visit to the house and she found out that it was your birthday or your anniversary was coming up, she always had something for you. Unfortunately, it wouldn't always be something that would be tailored to you. Here you go, Emily. Here's a handheld vacuum. In fact, I wasn't going to say this, but when she was in the hospital in the last few weeks before she passed away, I was visiting her, and I said to her, "Do you want to get a change of scenery and get out of this room?" And she said, "Yeah." So, it was in the evening, and she got in a wheelchair, and we wheeled down through the elevator and down to the ground floor of the hospital and walked around and just give her some change of scenery. And we ended up in the gift shop, which is a tiny little gift shop, but, we were in there, and she's picking up little knickknacks and looking at things, and finally we were sort of up near the till, and the lady behind the counter said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And as she was looking at things, I said, "No, it's okay, we're just looking." And then just as I finished saying that, I heard, and she put a bunch of stuff on the counter and turned around and said, "Jeff, pay the lady." So even in her hospital bedroom, she had stuff in the nightstand in case anybody popped by and needed a ring that had a watch on it or something like that. So, yeah, there really were two sides to my mom. There was sort of that, hard exterior that a lot of people experienced, certainly in business, but yet she was a generous, caring person that only wanted the best for her kids and her grandkids. And she'd do anything for them, sometimes to my dad's chagrin, especially when it involved money. But she always took time to get to know what we were doing. She always wanted to know what was going on in our lives. She knew all of our friends and schoolmates and teammates, and she made them all feel welcome whenever they were at our house or whenever she saw them somewhere else. And, I was going to talk a little bit about the Christmas sing-along event that's been touched on. That was a big part of our life, and it became a tradition. And, the sing-along was a perfect example, I think, of the various sides of my mom. On one hand, it represents her openness and generosity to welcome people into her home. Anyone was welcome. There was no invitation. If you showed up, you were welcome. And she'd treat you like family. But on the other hand, it represented that ongoing thread of resilience and tenacity to get things done that she had. Because having started the tradition in the West End back in the 60s, she hosted that sing-along party at Christmas every year without fail for nearly 60 years, with the exception of COVID. And to further use that example of her tenacity and resilience to get things done no matter what, just days before she passed away in hospital, sort of around the time Stuart was talking about there in the last few weeks, Mark was visiting her, and they were talking about the Christmas party at Christmas time and what date it was going to happen, and who are we going to have there, and are we going to have enough food and booze and all that kind of stuff. She was prepping up for an event that I think she knew she wasn't going to be a part of. But I remember her saying that we had to make sure we had sausage rolls. And vodka. I think she also mentioned that too. So it didn't matter to her that she wasn't going to be there. That really wasn't the point. It had to go on, and again, She was concerned about herself, she was concerned about others, and making sure that it happened. And so shortly after she passed away on November 21st, at Christmas time, we did have that event again this past Christmas. And I really appreciate those people who did attend and show up and made it another special occasion and allowed that tradition to go on at least one more year. So thanks for that. On August 7th, 2015, my dad died, and I think my mom's life really changed at that point. And as much as they lived quite independent lives and had their own interests, and often had the ability to argue with each other in separate rooms while my dad watched soccer on TV and my mom worked on her computer, I realized that after my dad died that he was a constant in her life, and he was always there for my mom. And no matter how busy and independent she was always there for him as well. And so after my dad died, my mom really wasn't the same. And she often said to my brother and I, in moments of sort of loneliness and sadness, that she'd say, all I want to do is join Alfie again. I just want to be with him again. And I don't think any of us expected her to outlive him by nearly 10 years, but she did. Again, she didn't go easily, she didn't go quickly, she didn't give up, and she stuck around even in sort of diminishing health for an additional 10 years, but eventually it was her time. And although my mom's passing was sad and emotional for us, I mean, no one wants to lose a loved one, it wasn't tragic. She lived a great life. She accomplished a lot of things in life and in work. She traveled, she had friends and family. She built a career. She saw her 2 sons grow up, and she saw the smiling faces of all 3 of her grandkids. So as sad as her passing can be, I truly believe there's a silver lining. And on November 21st, 2024, when she passed, she did what she always did. She accomplished that one last goal, that one last thing she quietly hoped for nearly 10 years. And she reconnected with my dad. Even though they're probably up in heaven in separate bedrooms while my dad watches TV and my mom works on her computer arguing with each other. So, you have a glass. Here's to Irene. Sorry, I should have introduced this. This is going to be the photo montage of Irene.
Bill. Can you clap?
Okay, I'm sure everybody's as thirsty as I am, so enjoy yourselves, have fun, and please talk amongst yourselves and let's share some stories about Irene. Thanks for coming.